Oh, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, let me make sure, are you all hearing me? If you are, you could just put a note in the chat so we'll get a sense of what's going on. I don't want us to start and people are not hearing. Okay, lovely. I'm seeing some yeses. Great. So good afternoon again. My name is Avril Balfon. Welcome. This is our third day of our first aid to cultural heritage in the Caribbean, building awareness, readiness, and response. And I thank you all so much for joining us. I know we did have some challenges in the beginning for persons getting on and so getting the information, but I'm so glad to see the response. And in terms of registration, we have quite a number of people registered. I do hope they can join us all this afternoon. Um, so that we could go straight into the official program. I understand there's quite a bit to cover. Today, well, as I said, my name is Avril Belfon. I'm here as the president of CABICA, which is the Caribbean branch of the International Council on Archives. And we are sharing this webinar. As we all know, we in the Caribbean face tremendous difficulties in terms of emergencies and disasters. And we think it's something that is definitely needed for us to support each other in building our capacity to respond and manage, to be prepared to respond and to be ready for such incidents. First of all, I have to say we send out our best wishes and our concerns to our colleagues in Honduras, Nicaragua, and all of us, I guess the rest of us who are experiencing the feeder bands, Jamaica, Bermuda, and even one of our presenters here, Samuel, Flamio Franco in Guatemala, they are experiencing very high winds. So I'm also letting you know that his internet is at spotty at best. So we do hope that he can remain and join us for the whole session. But we do have some contingencies in place, so we are learning on the and we're practicing what we're teaching. So hopefully it will be all well, and I do hope that everyone is safe in the region, and I know this storm is quite large and powerful. So if well, I've already sort of gotten into our team. So just to introduce our team today, we have our panelists will be Ms. Halcyon Wilshire Busby, who is the assistant archivist in Barbados at the Federal Archives, and also Mr. Samuel Franco, cultural director of the Cultural Emergency Center in Guatemala. I went through their full bios and so last day, and we will share those details in a Google group which we have started for this webinar, and we will be placing the PowerPoint presentations, any resource material, and so related to the webinar there. Once you're registered, you should get the link to that Google group, so you will get the content will be available to you going forward. Just a bit of housekeeping, of course. This work and this seminar has been conceived within the framework of ICCROM's flagship program on first aid and resilience for cultural heritage in times of crisis, and its capacity building project on culture cannot wait, heritage for peace and resilience, supported by the Swedish Postcode Foundation. Both our presenters are alumni of the FACT training, well, we call it first aid in cultural heritage. You'll hear me saying FACT all the time, but that's a FACT training. They have both been through that, and we do appreciate them being here to share that information, what they learned from it with us. Um, we also have on our team here, in addition to you'll be seeing myself here as Kavika, Ariana, who you're seeing there on your screen as admin. And any issues, she'll be monitoring the chat for questions, for raised hands, and any issues, urgent matters, you can type into the chat. If you're not hearing, if there's a problem, you let us know, and it will be monitored by her, and we will try to assist. When we get to the questions and answers, of course, you can also raise hands at that point, and we will unmute you at that time. Note that everyone is muted by the admin currently, but when we get to those areas where you can speak, we will unmute you. Also, this program is being live streamed via YouTube, and the session is being recorded. So for your information. Right. I think that covers some of it. There will be a substantial amount, as I said, of material being covered here today. And when Samuel begins, he will give you a little recap of what went before and give you the context of where we are now. But we do really want your interaction and your contribution. So please don't hesitate to put your questions or comments in the chat. And of course, when we get to the question and answers, you feel free to raise hands to answer there. Sometimes during the session this afternoon too, we will have some poll questions, and your feedback will be very much appreciated. So without further ado, I'd like to open the floor to Samuel to join us. Thank you all so very much, and I hope we have a wonderful and a fruitful discussion today.
Thank you, April. Yeah, thank you for your welcoming words. And let's see. Okay, so good day to everybody. It's good morning still in Guatemala, and like April says, we're experiencing the tail of ETA tropical storm, which has affected Nicaragua, Honduras, and also the northern part and Caribbean part of Guatemala. So this is just to make it more real. This is a real case, that is already happening. So I would like to recap on what we have done in the two previous sessions, and which has have been basically focused on the before stage of the whole process of risk management, because we have these three moments, the before, the during, and after the event. And in the previous two sessions, we thought about, we have shared the information about how to prepare, how to mitigate, because that is the first stage that we can do when we are peaceful, when we are not stressed, and that when we have time to risk assess our institution, our layers of enclosure, our agents, our hazards that may threat our institutions, and also to make evaluation of the magnitude of risk of our objects. And also we talk a little bit about, in the second session, we cover the evacuation procedure, which in this case, evacuation can take place before or after the event. But we stress that in the Caribbean region, where you have hurricanes, this is a hazard that can warn us 4 or 5 days in advance. So we already know that a hurricane is coming, or so we have time to evacuate or to put to locate our collections, our objects, or whatever documents we think it's the most valuable object or document in our collection. We have time to place it into a safe place. So we also thought about safe places like shelters for cultural heritage, and that's basically what we have covered in the two previous sessions that we had this week and last week. So today we're going to go into the during event phase of the process of risk management, and that's when first aid to cultural heritage in times of crisis comes. Because this is the time to respond and to analyze how the situation is. So can I please have the next slide? Okay, so I will do an introduction of cultural heritage first aid. Please, the next. And so what is cultural heritage first aid? Okay, first aid, if we think in a humanitarian way, first aid is the first assistance, the first attention that we give to humans when they have an accident or any health problems. So it is the same for cultural heritage. It is the same basic concept of giving first aid, whatever we can do immediately after the response, in order to mitigate the damage of our collection, of our building, or our document. So the cultural the heritage first aid action framework has this flow of which is basically there are basically three important steps to follow. And the first one would be the situation analysis, which we'll be talking about today. The next step, or step 2, would be the on-site damage and risk assessment. And the step 3 would be security and stabilization. These 3 steps will lead us to an early recovery phase, which is post, this first aid assistance or treatment. So throughout these 3 steps, it is important to keep 3 very important, 3 very essential components, which are documentation, risk management, communication, and coordination. Documentation, it is very important. So the more data you get, photographs of every single action that you take, the more photographs you take, it is very good. It will be very useful data for the next, when we come to the analysis stage. But also document, register, and so on. So basically, the documentation is always at every stage, once on site, and then while it's moving, or if it has to be transferred to another location or safe place, we also document before and after, and the movement track, and the whole process of, as we saw on the evacuation session. It is basically the same way that we keep track with our forms. And then communication and coordination, it is another very important element, because this is a very systematic operation. I mean, the risk assessment is risk management, sorry. It is a systematic activity. So it has to follow certain methodologies, certain protocols in order to do it properly. So communication, the way you communicate, how you communicate can be crucial in an emergency time. If your message is not very well addressed, you may not get, the results that you would expect. And coordination also, since this is a team work, it is important. There are many actors involved in this team. Some may be volunteers that do not have any experience of handling heritage and so on. So that's why it's important to coordinate, that somebody, that you create a team for coordinating. And this team, you of course have some kind of plan before the event. So we can go to the next slide, please. And so the guiding principles of for cultural heritage first aid would be that there are people-centered first aid. So you have to concentrate also on humanitarian ways. We have to remember that human lives are the priority. And then, so that should also always be our center first aid. But then once we have control, or the Red Cross or firemen or the institutions related to first aid, humanitarian first aid, we can take over the cultural heritage first aid. We must have an inclusive attitude and respect for diversity, as we may work in a different, let's say, political, religious context, racial context, that may not be the same for everyone. So we must have this inclusive and diversity attitude and respect for whoever we're working with. Then you must have a context-specific response. That's why it's important to do a context analysis in order to identify what we will need to respond, what kind of tools, what kind of expertise, what kind of people, what kind of supplies, and who should we ask permission to, the access, and so on. Then the interlock culture with humanitarian assistance. This means that we have to work together with teams of humanitarian assistance. As cultural first aiders, we have to work with the Red Cross, with the people from civil protection, like SEDEMA you have at the Caribbean. We have our own networks here in Central America, because it is a team effort, and we will need each other. You know, we cannot do without the first responders or civil protection. As cultural first aiders, we will not be able to complete our task. That is why it is very important to coordinate these humanitarian and cultural sectors. So do not harm. You know, we want to improve our things. We want to save, to mitigate, to reduce the damage. So it is important that when we handle materials, objects, or, you know, we make sure that we're not harming the cultural heritage involved. So we may go to the next slide, please. And so here we ask ourselves, who can give permission to initiate a cultural heritage first aid? It will depend, of course, on the context. But most of the cases might be the local government, might be the municipality, might be the governor, or any political body that may be in charge of the state. And then religious trust also could be, if we are talking about safeguarding religious collection, or, you know, most like in Central America and Latin America, we have a lot of colonial heritage, which is owned or by the church. So, and usually they are very vulnerable to vandalism, to thefts. So the religious trust might be the ones that can give permission to access to a particular church or a sacred site, you know, in case of indigenous people. And so we have, those might be the ones who can give us access. And then community leaders also, in the case that we have an event in a community, you know, communities are organized and they have their own government, sometimes their own local governments or authorities. So community leaders might be also some other permission givers. Next, please. So who can implement cultural first aid? The person or we call like cultural first aider. You know, this is the title that, you know, I'm a cultural first aider, for example. So this, the cultural first aider should be the one that coordinates the actions, the one that organizes in conjunction with the emergency responders, heritage owners, and volunteers, the response action. So, but basically, the cultural first aider would be the one, ideally, that to implement cultural heritage first aid. Next, please. So, when we think about the cultural first aider profile, you know, what should be their qualities, her qualities, or his qualities, or her attributes, or so on. There are three basic issues. One is we need a person who might be resourceful, you know, that understands the diverse forms of cultural heritage, somebody who knows of the emergency context, and somebody with strong analytical and critical skills. Then it has to be people-focused, like an active listener, somebody who understands and respects existing social structures, beliefs, and values. Also, it should be like a team player, because we're, you know, working with a team. Somebody sensitive to human needs, and somebody capable of building trust. And finally, it should be an action-oriented person, positive, with a can-do attitude, creative problem solver, and also a quick thinker with physical stamina. So we must be in good shape. You know, it also, when we are cultural first aiders, we ideally, we have to exercise and be in good shape, because sometimes, there are physical activities that we will encounter along the responding process. So next, please. So why is it important to coordinate cultural heritage first aid with the overall emergency response? And like I mentioned, it is important to coordinate the response actions with the Red Cross, the police, the army. There are a lot of actors involved in an emergency. Of course, it will depend on the magnitude of the event. Some emergencies might require just a small team, but if it is a national disaster like a big hurricane and so on, then we will have to coordinate this with the whole emergency response agencies, in order to have not only the access but the infrastructure to move on. Because like, for example, in Central America, we work with the SEDEMA equivalent to the area, or the local civil protection, and they have access to helicopters, to boats, to trucks, to all the infrastructure that a cultural first aider will never have. So that is why we complement each other. They may not have the knowledge or the expertise to how to handle cultural objects, but they have knowledge for humanitarian, and they have the physical infrastructure, equipment, that we may not have. Next slide, please. So when is it appropriate to provide cultural first aid? Well, it will also depend on the event, because first, of course, again, we have to think about human lives. And this is where risk management comes all the time. We have to think about the risk of our team, of our objects, in every moment, because every moment changes. There are secondary hazards that can affect something that we may thought, oh, that's already secure. But if we don't consider secondary hazards that may happen as a result of a first event, then it will be, damage the object. So, and also, like, for example, at the National Museum of Brazil, 2 years ago, it took like 8 months to get the cultural first aiders to the building. Why? Because this was a big building that had a structural problem. So first, the teams had to secure that nobody was going to be hurt by entering the building without first securing the structure of the building, because it was a big fire that weakened the walls, the structure of the building. So then there's a team of, in this case, structural engineers that do the risk assessment, and then they have to stabilize the building. And since this was a huge building, it took like 8 months. And then, of course, there are political issues in between, permissions, budgets, by the time they can really act and put all the stabilization in reality. So that's why it took. So there is never a defined moment of when to provide cultural first aid, but basically it is when everything is secure. Next, please. So we have also to. This is like well. These are some questions that you may ask to yourself. This is, you have to find out who coordinates the overall emergency response in your country. Is it the government? Is it the firemen? Is it the military? Is it SEDEMA? I don't know. So that is something that you all of you must have because in every island might be different, the institution that coordinates the overall emergency. So that is also a very important issue to know. So at the time of when the emergency comes, you already have a database of these people, how to contact them, and who to contact and where, and so on. So is cultural heritage first aid included in the overall local or national emergency preparedness and response? I think this is a poll that we're going to have for you. So you may ask yes or no if you have this situation of cultural heritage first aid included in the overall local of national emergency preparedness and response. Because that's very important to, like I mentioned, without the civil protection, partnership, we will not be able to complete our tasks. So this is something that we have to work. It's a long process. It takes time because it's a very political issue, because usually the first responder, the civil protection agencies are government-based institutions, and that create, they have a certain bureaucratic steps that you have to cultivate. Like it takes time, and maybe you like we have had experiences here in the area where we have advanced by making contacts with the civil protection agency, but then there is a change of minister, there is a change of government, or a change of director, and that brings us back to where we started from. So, this is a process that it takes time, and also it is very important to have somebody who has the vision. There are momentums where we have officers that have the vision that we have as cultural first aiders, that speaks our own language, let's say, in order to act faster and with more effective response. So we have that poll, and I think that's where I stop right now. I don't know. Can I see the next slide? Can I go? Okay.
Sure. Hi, Samuel.
Okay.
I'm just letting everyone get about 30 seconds more to vote, and then I'll share the results of the poll.
Okay, so I'll wait.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're waiting to get some results from the poll. And like I said, it is very important to start trying to make connections, trying to get a relationship with the the civil protection responders in your neighborhood, your region, your island, because that is something that it takes time, and also, like I said, it is very, very, very important. We have tried here for a few years. We have been working, and also we have realized that it is important, as you're following this webinar, it is very important to invite people from the civil protection to share this information, so they can also learn. They can also be have some capacity building about first aid to cultural heritage. So we have the results of the poll, and we can see that there is a 91% that do not have the first aid, the cultural heritage first aid included in their overall local and national emergency preparedness. And I am curious of who responded yes. I would be curious of that. I mean, just to know who is ahead of us. Okay, so Maria Lopez was the one who I answered yes, the poll. Okay, that's Puerto Rico, I understand. Okay, thank you, Maria, for your answer, and positive. And now we go into the step one of this framework of the situation analysis. The framework of responding to the cultural first aid, to giving first aid. Can I go to the next slide, please? Okay, so first we what is this question? What is situation analysis? Why undertake a situation analysis for cultural heritage? And who should participate in a situation analysis? Okay, so when we talk about situation analysis, it is a tool, actually, that to identify a lot of data, to gather data, to collect data, you know, of the event. And that because the situation analysis, and that also it's an answer for the why. The situation analysis will lead us into, will give us some information in order to prepare our plan, in order to see, okay, what is going on, what we need, who we need, and the budgets and planning, the team and so on. So the situation analysis it is a basic first step to take when we go into these emergencies, because otherwise we don't know how to prepare or how to make a plan. Who should participate in a situation analysis? Basically, there are various actors. Ones, of course, would be the directors or owners of the collection, the director of a museum, the archive, because, of course, they know what they have and they want to have control. They would like to have control of the documents and objects. And when I mean control, is that they, that they want, they can give information to whoever else is assistant, because like volunteers also can participate, experts, the civil protection, but the owner of the collection or the director of the institution is the one who can better guide all these teams. Can we go to the next one, please? So the situation analysis has these 3 steps where you collect data. You collect as much data as you can. And then you analyze this data. And then once you have analyzed it, you have identified the needs for your deployment or for your actions, then you can do a plan. And the plan will lead you into the next action. Next, please. So, for example, this is a situation analysis process. Like we do, first we can analyze whether it is how critical the event is. Is it a critical event? Is it a national disaster, or is it just a local, very local, minor event? Then also the context and legal framework of the situation. Whether it is a public institution, is it a government, a military one, a religious, is it a community, it's a mixed public-private, in order to know all this legal framework. And then you have to identify the actors and local capacities, which are different for every event. The actors might be, and local capacities, for example, if you have a firemen, if you have Red Cross, because like, for example, in a lot of communities in my country, there are no firemen, there are no Red Cross, no health. That's the reality of Latin America. So we have to really evaluate, what we have, what are our local capacities, how well prepared, or if we need, according to the how critical the event is, if we need to ask for international assistance in case we don't have, or for neighboring assistance from another province, from our same island, that they may have these local capacities to assist. And then we do a heritage-specific SWOT of our heritage. We have to see what can happen, what could threat, what is an opportunity, and so on. Obtaining access, it's what we mentioned before, like permissions. Obtaining access is it's something that we will not know unless we do this context analysis. Because if we know that this is a community-based event, then we know that we have to go to the community leaders to try to ask for the permission. If it's a government, we may have to go to the Ministry of Antiquities or the Ministry of Culture, you know, so it depends on the event. And once we have all these, we also prepare for deployment of our team. When we prepare for our deployment, we will see later on this presentation that we have to think about the kind of experts that we may need. If it's a library or an archive that was affected, we may need paper conservators. And if it's like an audiovisual archive, we may need audiovisual conservators and experts, and textile experts, you know, it depends on your collection, archaeologists, if it's an archaeological site and so on. And again, documentation, risk management, and communication and collaboration has to be present. They have to be present. I mean, these are something that has to be embedded all the time in all of us. Next, please. So, so we have analyzed the context of the emergency. Then we will see what cultural heritage has been affected, and then once we have identified, then we have to identify stakeholders and actors related to the cultural heritage affected. So this is where I end this part of this portion of our presentation, and I let Halcyon to take over with the next.
Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning, depending on where you're looking at us from in the region. So I'm going to handle the whole aspect of the affected cultural heritage. So this is the other step in the situation analysis. So, okay, so we have basic considerations that have to be made when we're looking at the particular cultural heritage that has been affected. So we have to determine the types and the number of cultural heritage affected when this disaster happened. As Samuel just alluded to, so it could be from the country context, or it could actually be in a localized area, depending on the type of disaster that actually took place. We have modern technology now, so we should use it to our advantage. So mapping out our various cultural institutions by establishing geo-coordinates of heritage sites, that is also quite pertinent in terms of mapping where your heritage sites are. And it also helps in terms of reporting, especially to our stakeholders, emergency responders, where we can actually locate the heritage sites. An example that comes to mind is within the region, for instance, is Antigua and Barbuda, when they were affected by a hurricane about 3 years ago, when Barbuda was essentially flattened. So by mapping out geo-coordinates, not being able to even, you as a first responder, probably not knowing the area, the geo-coordinates would help in locating certain heritage sites. And that could help in salvaging any materials that may have been affected by the disaster. So we also look at the significance of the cultural heritage. What's the intrinsic value? So we attach values to various heritage sites and objects and so on. So we need to determine the values within our various constructs. So within a community, how they value, for instance, their churches, their mosques, their temples may be different to how, say, for instance, an archive or a library may value the objects or the materials, documents within their holdings as well. So we need to know the context and understand that people have different value systems attributed to their cultural heritage. And also we need to look at the local belief systems, tie that into how we actually going to deal with the cultural heritage. I want to emphasize being discerning. You have to have a level of respect and understanding for the communities that you're going to be dealing with. So you have to look at the religious beliefs in the affected areas. Apologies for the spelling error. And communication skills are also quite paramount in that in some of our territories, we have different languages spoken. We also have to not have a top-down approach and insist that, you know, all people, say for instance, would just speak what people could call quote unquote standard English or Spanish or anything like that. So you'd have a localized form of language within communities as well. So we need to take these things into consideration when we're dealing with cultural heritage. We also have to look at gender dynamics. There may be spaces that within cultural heritage, especially intangible cultural heritage, where gender dynamics play a role. Say, for instance, men or women can't enter. So all these things we have to factor in, especially when we're creating our teams, depending on the affected area. And representation also matters. So who we put on our team and who goes out there represents our group in terms of saving our cultural heritage. So this is one example I want to highlight here. So the First Peoples of Trinidad and Tobago, or sometimes called the Kalinago group, or another localized form of language used to describe them, also called the Caribs in Trinidad and Tobago. In 2013 or 14, I think it was, while renovations were being done at the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago, they discovered grave sites of the First Peoples. So it halted some of the reconstruction processes because and it also they brought in the local Kalinago community within the First Peoples group within Trinidad and Tobago to aid in how they were going to deal with the remains of their ancestors. So depicted there is a ceremony for the rededication of the remains of the First Peoples of Trinidad and Tobago. This is in Port of Spain, Trinidad. And so you could see there some artifacts found, and you can also see bones. And then you see the head of the First Peoples community conducting what essentially called a service or ritual for the rededication of the materials in the Parliament. And you also see musical tributes being played. So it's a lived experience. So what we want to emphasize is culture is a lived experience. Hundreds of years later, they're still paying homage to their ancestors. And these artifacts and bones were dated back, I think, about to 900 AD. So this is how we need to be discerning when we're dealing with our local communities. So they married government intervention with the local community to ensure that things were done in a respectful manner, because that could have caused total strife if it wasn't handled well. because at the end of the day, you're dealing with people's culture and their belief systems. So data collection is quite important, as Samuel alluded to previously. So we have to determine whether emergency management plans exist for affected cultural heritage and analyze the cause of the damage, procure data from known sources in the affected area as well. So this is where you work with your community and just find out from them what has happened, what's been affected, and you go from there. So I have a question for participants. So who do you think should be involved in carrying out situation analysis from what you've heard thus far? So don't be shy. You could talk to us. Let's hear you at this juncture.
So you can either raise hands if you want to speak your comment and we'll unmute you, or you can add it in the chat and Ariana will read out for us what's in there.
So what groups you think should be involved? Who in the community? At various levels of society. So if you just shoot some answers at us so we could see if you're fully grasping this.
Halcyon, someone has asked if you have a particular example to share.
So for example, well, I guess I'll be giving out answers. If an incident happens at so a fire breaks out at a cultural institution, say for instance, a museum, who
We
would be the
have-
actors involved?
Okay, thank you. We
have
have a
someone.
comment.
Okay.
Jacinth, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, has said community leaders, government agencies. Anne-Marie says mayors. Julissa says, for example, the leader of a community, the management, like the director.
Okay. Yeah, so that it's a start as well, but there's some other actors who could be involved. So if anyone wants to talk? Yeah.
Okay, so I'm seeing just if I may, Halcyon, I'm
No
seeing
problem.
people, indicating officials, police, fire, etc.,
Right.
experts in the areas and so on. But I want to just throw out to you all a situation that happened here for us. So for example, if something happens on your site and I know a particular colleague that was an issue, but you cannot get to the site, and the people who are identified in your group, well, maybe hitherto up to that point, are not able to access your area. Who you then, I would suggest, you would then need to be sure that you have somebody in your neighborhood or
That's right.
somebody close to your facility who can then be designated to respond. You know, and it may not necessarily be all the officials and the people that you think would necessarily be there. I mean, it's not like you're setting anybody into your facility, but it has to be planned and set up from before.
It
But
has
if
to
you
be.
consider that you may not have access, especially like Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago. Port of Spain gets marooned every time rain falls for about 10 minutes.
That's right.
And so if something happens and we're not actually on site, but you need to get to the building, you probably won't be able to get to Port of Spain. So there's got to be somebody who's right there that is already in your cadre of people.
That's right.
Who's identified and know that, okay, if we can't physically be there, okay, you are our next resort. So
Right.
so it may not always be an official.
It may not always be an official, but it could also be someone from the community who may do something, but we're not asking people to run into buildings, right? That's the thing.
Hi, guys.
Something already established and properly arranged.
Right.
I've unmuted Cheryl, whose hand is raised.
Okay. Yeah, Cheryl.
Go ahead, Cheryl. We're not hearing you. Okay, I don't know why we're not hearing
Yeah,
her.
we're not hearing her at all.
Um,
So,
but she's
so
unmuted, yeah?
Yeah, Cheryl is unmuted. I'm not sure if she's having some technical difficulties.
All
okay.
right.
She says she'll send a message in the chat.
Okay.
Okay. I
Yeah,
just
so
one thing.
Mhm.
I just wanted to add. Sorry, I didn't
Go
have
ahead.
my thing on. I'm seeing a comment there that came up last day when we spoke about evacuation. I think it's from Valerie. Yes, about other institutions and spaces where you can evacuate, and in terms of your neighbors and persons that can respond, or where you would take your things if something has to happen.
Yes.
If something happens, then those are things you have to consider as well.
It will always be pertinent if you can actually have secondary storage areas, even within other institutions to help with that, or even if you have the resources enough to just have like, in some countries, they have dedicated warehouses for secondary storage. So it's actually kept empty. And in the event of a disaster, that's where the things go. So, but I know in our region, we're starved for resources in this area. So we have to actually think outside of the box and collaborate with other institutions to ensure that, our holdings will be placed somewhere safely in the event. But there's also the issue that could happen, and you should have more than one secondary storage area, because the secondary storage area can also be affected as well.
Mhm.
And you don't want to have your secondary storage in an area that is close to the area of disaster. So that's something, for a potential disaster, that's something you need to consider as well.
Mhm.
So if we have no more participants, I'll just continue on. Pardon?
Just one more, Halcyon. I just wanted to just say Cheryl's comment. It came up in the chat.
Okay.
And she said in the message, she suggested Friends of the Archives and Library as a group that could be, most of us have
Oh,
those
yeah.
groups in our organizations, and they could be a useful collaborators, people to work with to help secure our
Almost definitely. And
part
but
of
what you want to
funds.
what you want to do, I mean, in that event is to probably help in training some of these people in terms of emergency response
Yes. Yes.
as well. So that's another group that we could possibly look at. So thanks for that, Cheryl. So what we're going to be looking at now are the stakeholders and actors in cultural first aid. So we have to identify the actors, so the owners of the heritage assets. Who is dependent on it? So the community, and the community varies. It could be the academic community, government officials, citizens within your society, and how cultural assets play a role within our society as part of our sustenance. A number of us are tourism dependent, and if we are dependent on tourism for our as our main form of sustenance, and we have tourists coming here to these spots and they have nothing to look at and no place to go, no museums to go to, etc., it could put a big spoke in our wheels. So that's something we have to factor in as well. Everything is interconnected. So we also have to have a coordinator of the emergency exercise as well. So usually this person is referred to as an incident commander. You can't just go into an area, into a burning building or a flood to, as we say in Trinidad, to play hero, basically, and go in and save objects just like on a whim. There is a certain process that you need to follow in terms of going in, saving the objects, ensuring that life and limb is safe. So Samuel spoke to stabilization of buildings. So sometimes, or mainly like in earthquakes or even fire and water as well, water damage, a number of structures become weak, the walls become weak. So that's where structural engineers, civil engineers also play a role, and architects too, in ensuring that the structures are safe so that we can enter the buildings if the buildings have cultural heritage, and also saving the facade of some buildings because even those buildings of themselves are cultural heritage assets. So we're looking at the risk and damage assessments as well. That's where documentation comes in, and engaging emergency responders. So we have to develop that within our communities, within our countries, that fervor for engaging our emergency actors. So the military, the fire, our police, and our various district emergency offices or organizations within our territories as well. So in terms of mapping the stakeholders, we have to look at the various actors who would be part of this. So for instance, the Ministry of Culture, you would think would spearhead this. And this is if you have a Ministry of Culture within your country dynamic. But the Ministry of Culture should not just work in a silo, but you could also interact with other government agencies, say for instance, public utilities, to ensure that water, electricity is turned off, because you don't want to create further risks. Work with local government as well. As I said before, look at the defense force, military, cultural first aiders as well, with all type of training. Local heritage organizations, because you need their feedback as well. The local community, because they would know what's going on within their societies. So that's pertinent that we need to engage them. And also religious boards. A number of our community members are part of a number of religious organizations, especially in the region. And some of them hold a lot of clout. So we need to engage those bodies as well when dealing with this. So this here is an example of a stakeholders actors map, an actors map. So you see the levels here of the various relationships. So this could be like the Ministry of Culture, if you have as stated here, a State Board of Antiquities as well. Military, the religious boards, local community, and they're all connected to heritage in itself. So you can see the levels of the relationships, whether it's weak, moderate, strong, and it's all interconnected. That's what's important. So in certain instances, we may have to engage foreign actors to help us out, because it may be an instance where the entire country, especially in our small island developing states, they have been totally decimated, depending on the type of disaster that we've encountered. So this is where bodies like UNESCO, SEDEMA, as well as a regional body, would work in conjunction with our local authorities and help in this vein. So I just wanted to bring some examples of regional bodies that could help within this context, or potential stakeholders that we could engage as a region. So we have UNESCO based in Jamaica, one of the offices based in Jamaica, to engage UNESCO to come on board, and they actually are. And also looking at SEDEMA as the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, because they carry out a lot of disaster response initiatives, especially in the region when we have many types of disasters. CARICOM Impacts is also an important agency that I think we need to engage with as well, because in times of disasters, what we need to also know is that could also potentially be a time for desperate people to do desperate things. And you may have people going in to try to salvage or rob and basically steal materials of cultural significance, and it could it has the potential to go on the black market. So we need to be, so security is of high priority, especially during times of disaster, because it's quite easy for these things to be stolen and lost. And we have the development of, and we're trying to start, and we're in we halfway there in the implementation or the work of the Caribbean Heritage Emergency Network, where various stakeholders could come together and go into our various territories and aid where needed with heritage restoration and the salvaging of objects of community and regional significance. So the local agencies that we could look to identify with as well are, as said previously, like our police, our fire department, the defense forces. So you have in Trinidad, you have the Army, the Coast Guard, and the Air Guard, and our various Department of Emergency Management officers. So each territory has a different DEMA, so to speak. And where community-based organizations are concerned, the district emergency officers are also play a big role in terms of how community-based organizations can organize themselves to actually save culture.
Hi, Halcyon. I'm just noting that Anne-Marie's hand is raised.
No problem.
So I'm going to allow her to talk now.
Yes, please. Hi, Anne-Marie.
Hi, Anne-Marie. If you have any trouble using the unmute feature, you're welcome to use the chat as well.
I guess in the meantime, we could put up the poll question, Ariana. So I have a question to you participants. Do you have a map of your community or city outlining the precise locations of all cultural heritage sites within your communities? This is arduous work, but it's important work that we need to carry out if it's not done yet. Because as mentioned previously, in times of disaster, we could just give the geo coordinates and help the first responders to help us, basically. So this is where we need to plan ahead. Did Anne-Marie get through?
Yeah, actually, she said in the chat she didn't mean to raise her hand, so that's no problem.
Oh, okay. All right, so 30 more seconds for the poll.
Yeah, about half the participants have responded, so
Okay.
I'll give you 30 seconds again.
All right.
Okay, I'm gonna end the poll now.
Thank you. All right. So this is helpful. So we have 30% of participants saying that yes, they do have something outlined for their communities or and city with regard to the heritage sites. That's actually pretty good. And 70% of the respondents have said that they don't. So this is something we need to factor in when we're looking at disaster mapping or planning within our institutions. And we can help each other. And this information, and by collating this type of information, we can help our local bodies or various ministries and stakeholders in terms of determining where the cultural heritage is in times of a disaster. And this can also lead to grant funding as well when you're doing reporting. So this is quite a pertinent exercise that we should carry out within our various jurisdictions.
So Halcyon,
Yes, please.
don't have my raise hand. Okay, so I just wanted to ask if we could ask the persons who said yes to they're having the mapping already done, or at least having a map of some sort in your territory or your area. Could you at least give us a little idea of like who initiated it, who championed it?
Right.
Because we talked about the different stakeholders. Sometimes, if it was initiated, say, as you said, maybe a Ministry of Culture or through your SEDEMA, or did you as a cultural institution reach out and get that done, or this was just part of what your town and country planning, had that initiative? It would be good to hear from you all. Who
Definitely.
initiated and championed that of the 7 folks who said you already have
Yeah.
that
So
mapping?
let's hear from you. Let's hear how you went about doing this. Any takers?
I haven't seen anybody.
Because as said previously, by doing this work, we're trying to preserve for the next generation. We're trying to put things in place for people who come after us in our various institutions as well. Right?
So I'm saying, Halcyon, that someone from the folks from Jamaica is saying that it was initiated by Jamaica National Trust. It was done by us, a cultural agency. It is part of the JNHT mandate. I'm assuming the same National Trust that we're talking about, their mandate.
Okay.
I know locally for us in Trinidad and Tobago, I know there's a mapping exercise going on, but it's being run and directed through the Town and Country Planning Agency, but our National Trust also comes under town and under that ministry. So there is involvement by them in that initiative in terms of mapping, but they're looking at mapping built-in culture, built-in natural heritage in the first instance.
This is happening in Barbados as well. They've started that exercise in terms of mapping the National Trust here. So it's happening. So we want to encourage you in territories that may not have started this, or to at least find out if other institutions within your various territories are doing or conducting this mapping exercise, because it's a worthwhile endeavor. You can't go wrong by not doing this.
Just one more comment. I really want to point this out because it is really pertinent. It's from Cheryl Sylvester. I'm thinking Cheryl Sylvester from Grenada, if I'm sure it's you.
Hi, Cheryl.
I'm seeing in small communities like many of ours in the region, do you think this is absolutely necessary where everybody knows where everybody and everything is? And a very good question. The thing is,
yes,
that's one of our issues in the Caribbean. We are so oral. All of us, we believe that. It's true.
Yeah.
We all, somebody must know. It's somebody knows, some elder, somebody knows where it is. But I think what we want to highlight here, the issue, it may not be that, okay, you have to do a full I forget the wording of the
mapping
country, yes, but it needs to be documented. I think that's the main thing that we need to get in here.
That's the main thing.
Because all the elders and all the people who know, and maybe the community, they will not necessarily always be around. And I think the issue here is documentation. The extent of it, as you rightly pointed out, may depend on your peculiar circumstance or your area and your context. But I think the takeaway is that there needs to be some sort of documentation.
There would need to be documentation, but at the end of the day, I mean, if you're dealing with intangible forms of culture, say for instance, villages that carry out certain rituals and so on, but who are still closed off, if you intimate to them, you know, how this could be helpful to their community, because it's not about going to be dogmatic and say, oh, you must do this. So you have to take a delicate approach based on the communities that you're actually dealing with. And, or even if it's, say, for instance, the Maroons in Jamaica, how they deal with their community relations, how they deal with that aspect of life, or even the Kalinago peoples in Dominica, you know, so you have to be very careful. And as I said previously, you have to be quite discerning in terms of how you approach your communities, depending on the type of heritage and your governmental organizations as well. So this is where Samuel comes in with the analysis of the information to be collected. So I thank you all for listening. And any questions, I could take them after we've completed this session.
Over to me. Okay, Samuel, yes, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, now, thank you. Okay, that's great, Halcyon, very nice. So I will follow your presentation, and I will take over now with the analysis of the information collected. So we have seen, you know, we have already talked about all these issues that we have to consider in order to do the next move, in order to plan, in order to go to the step 2, which will be the risk and damage assessment. So before we do that, we have to analyze the information collected, and there are 3 basic issues that we have to consider when we do the analysis. So first would be to identify the cultural heritage assets that are most significant, which are the most affected, the most significant objects that we have to take care of. So this is mainly to prioritize, because sometimes, like we have mentioned along the sessions, there will never be enough time to salvage or to protect all our documents or all our collections. But that's why we must have a map of values in the first stage. When we are in the peace times, we have to create a map of values. What is the most valuable object in my collection? What is the most valuable document in my archive? So if we only have 1 hour to evacuate, or 1 hour to or we have to respond or to rescue, to salvage some document, we have to go immediately to this place and try to see, try to rescue if it is still there, or if it, do the assessment whether it was completely damaged or it is not damaged at all. So that's why it's important to identify the cultural heritage assets that are more significant when we are doing responding, because also to stabilize them in this particular case, because there might be a document that survived that was affected by the event, let's say like paper, if they are wet, we may have time to stabilize this, these papers by taking a priority action to stabilize it. So number 2 would be to identify the heritage that are heavily damaged. So that probably will need a triage or something that we will, some kind of action that we will talk in our next session, next week. But it is important to identify, what is more heavily damaged in this event. And then the number 3 is to identify vulnerabilities to secondary hazards, which can lead to further damage and deterioration. Like, for example, if we leave an object that it is not so secure in terms of security, let's say a guard or something that we may take temporarily to a courtyard or outside the building to protect it, to mitigate the damage. If we don't have a security guard looking after these particular objects, they might be stolen. So that could be a secondary hazard. That's an example, and there are many hazards, secondary hazards that we will address in our next week session. But in this stage of in this stage of situation analysis, it is very important to identify these issues from the information collected. So we can move to the next slide, please. And so when we do the on-site risk assessment, this is carried out. This will be, like I said, the next session, but this is carried out dependent on the severity of the damage incurred of the cultural heritage assets, and determined by what we have mentioned before about what it has been heavily or partially damaged. So next slide, please. So when we conduct assessments, we must have uniform assessment forms like this. There are templates and manuals. I think the toolkit of the first aid to cultural heritage publication has some templates to conduct damage assessment on mobile and intangible cultural heritage. Then it is always important that we are still under that cycle of the elements of documentation, collaboration, risk management. So like I mentioned before, photographs are always important in every stage, because everything, any photograph that may give you information or to some other collaborators, some other colleagues that may not be involved in this phase of the response. If we have documentation, anybody who takes over in a posterior or after activity will have this data, to keep working. Then we can assign like a degree of damage, like a major, minor, or moderate. Use formats that can be understood by all the stakeholders. Remember that stakeholders may not speak our own language in terms of cultural language that we use. So these formats that when you communicate are very important, that can be understood in order to get funding, support, or assistance, or just a response for permission, for access, and so on. So please, the next. So then we have to define, to identify what kind of expertise are we going to need. And as I mentioned before, if it's a library or an archive, we are definitely thinking of paper conservators. For example, if it's a building, we need structural engineers. And if it's a textile, the same, photographs. So depending on the degree of damage, field experts of different backgrounds would be required. So that's important also to identify during the process of the situation analysis. Next, please. Other considerations that we have are security actions. As I mentioned before, it is always important to secure all our objects or collection or documents, because in all the different activities that will happen during the response, there's vulnerability to be stolen, and so that's why we have to keep track on every single movement, because there's that can lead to illicit traffic, as Halcyon noted before. Because while we are worrying about taking care of our objects, some others are thinking of how to steal them. So we have to be all the time play safe, and that's refers to the risk management issue that we mentioned, that has to be all the time, because there might be a risk of theft, a risk that in case of an earthquake, for example, there are always replicas or secondary movements. So there might be a wall that did not collapse in the first quake, but it may collapse on a second or third quake. And so we have to make sure that we don't have objects or documents close to these vulnerable walls that we may not identify at first glimpse, since we are not structural engineers. But you have to that's why you have to be very resourceful, think ahead of every contingency that may happen. And it's like Murphy's law, if it may happen, it will happen. So utilizing the stakeholder map, it's very useful, because not just on this first respond action, but also for the following activities that will follow the first aid to cultural heritage. The stakeholder map will be very important, because as Halcyon very well noted, there are various actors that require for various activities, or for various needs, I should say. And then also we have to think about what types of equipment are going to use in this particular event. If we need shelves, if we need trays, if we need Ziploc bags. Of course, personal protection equipment, it's always a must. Before we deploy our team, they must have helmets, boots, gloves, goggles, lanterns, batteries, and it's an endless list depending on the context of the event. But that's something we do during the situation analysis also. This identification of what types of equipment, and then identification of strategies for communication that relates, for example, when we do some response in particular areas, for example, that they speak different language, or they have a dialect or a very colloquial language, and also the logistics of this community might be different from the ones from the big city. So there is a language, not necessarily a particular dialect or language, but there should be a strategy of communication to address, to communicate with this community back and forth. So we have to make sure that they understand our message, and also we have to make sure that we understand their message. So next, please. So once we have taken those considerations, we have to make our plan for the on-site first aid actions. Here, it's a very large list. I just made a whole list because I don't want to miss anything. It's a long list. But to make a plan, you have to predict the time period, the size and scope, the costs and objectives of the on-site operation. That's very important. The roles and responsibilities of the institutions, the emergency actors, cultural first aiders and volunteer groups involved, the formal permissions and community-based consultations necessary to begin on-site assessments on security and stabilization measures, the communication plan, what means of communication will be used, who will be in charge. And this is very important before we carry on to talk about media. When there is an event, there's always there are television reporters, journalists who want to cover the event. And it is very important to have one person who should be the one to communicate, because otherwise you may mislead the population, the whole community, with false information or uncertain information. So that is why recommended to assign somebody who will be in charge of media. So she or he will know exactly what message they want the public to know. Instead of just letting anybody address messages to media, it becomes a chaos. Like COVID-19, for example, is an example. We get all this false news and so on. And that can also happen during a hurricane or earthquake and so on. And they will not certainly help anybody. So the preparation and resources required for doing on-site work, including a specific pre-event documentation for cultural heritage assets. And with this documentation, we may refer to photographs or registration of how vulnerable this object was before the event, or how certain information or data that responders will have to know in order to salvage this object properly. A list of emergency supplies and equipment needed for the on-site work. That's what I mentioned before. And the type of on-site training or orientation required by volunteers and emergency responders prior to first aid. This is also an important issue. Like, for example, yesterday we had a webinar on the Lebanon case, which happened a few months ago. And also, I could mention another case in Nepal in the earthquake of 2015, and many other cases where we have volunteers. In Iraq museum also, there were a lot of volunteers, but volunteers are useful, but they can be harmful also if you don't train them, because they are not, they don't have necessarily knowledge of what they're handling or how fragile, how the significance of the object they're moving. So it is, before you deploy volunteers, it is very important to train, to give an express overview of some kind of capacity building about what they're going to get into, because otherwise that could be a secondary hazard. If they are not trained or they are not aware of what they are really handling. And usually volunteers, like for example, I lived a few earthquakes in this part of the world, and usually schools, kids, usually are the ones who are there, because nobody goes to school because of protection, so they are sent to help, or they come to willing to help, they offer themselves, and they can be very useful. But again, you have to give them some kind of introduction or training about what they're doing or what they're dealing with. The safety and quality control criteria for implementing first aid. Security or safety in this case, which is different, safety of people, safety of your team, and who is going to control this team, who is going to tell them when to go, when to evacuate the team. I'm talking about human beings. If the building is not so stable, and like I said, especially in earthquakes, you have these replicas, and which they don't tell you when they're coming. I have been, I remember I was helping in an earthquake, and we were moving, it was a recording facility which had a lot of recordings on shelves, and we were removing all these tapes while the second replica came. The shelves began to fall. It was, so you have to know, we had to evacuate, and then we were not allowed to go in anymore. So this criteria has to be taken by somebody. This person, it's a key person, the one who has this criteria to say, okay, let's stop now, or let's continue, or just forget about it. The criteria and modes of evaluation. Who will do the evaluation? How are they doing? How will they do the evaluation? So that definitely should be by experts, by conservators, or depending, can be structural engineers as well if it's a building, or archaeologists if it's an archaeological site, and so on. So the monitoring regime, who will do it? What will be the time frame? Monitoring is essential all the time, because in this risk management scenario, anything can change from one moment to another. I just put the example of COVID-19. We're living a hazard. I mean, we're living a hazard that is not included in any manual of first aid to cultural heritage. And the pandemic has had an incredible impact on intangible cultural heritage, and it will go on for the next months. I can see it here with indigenous communities. A lot of festivals are being banned. They already banned the Easter, the Holy Week for next year, which is 6 months away from now. But so the impact. Who is monitoring this? I mean, why are they doing this? Because events are changing. We cannot plan anymore. We cannot be precisely. I cannot plan, okay, I will do an inside practical exercise in Barbados next week. Maybe next week they close the airport, or there are no airlines flying there anymore. So, that's why we have to monitor not just the objects, but also the environment, the news. And it is the same for other hazards. I'm just putting the COVID-19 because this is a perfect example that nobody thought of, and from now on we will have to think about it, because we're going to live with this, and there might be some another one coming in the future years. So for those generations who may live another one in the future, they at least will have all the data that we produce today to mitigate the damage, because we can only, as we said in the previous sessions, we can only mitigate. We cannot stop nature but reduce the risk. So next, please. Next slide. Okay. So then we are also talking, we have talked about situation analysis, but we can talk about conflict analysis. What is conflict analysis? Conflict analysis is a tool that helps to identify the root causes of a conflict and to understand the triggers that may turn a latent conflict into a violent one. These triggers may include the international targeting of cultural heritage. Next, please. So, how do we carry out a conflict analysis? So there are three major issues that we have to consider when we carry out conflict analysis. We have to analyze the conflict causes, the actors, and the content dynamics. So, for example, if we're talking about conflict causes, we have to think about the history of the conflict, the physical and demographic features, the structural inequalities of the situation. We must have map of the sources of the tensions and conflict, which may include cultural symbols, the identification of links between sources of using in different in different sectors, including the cultural heritage sector. Then for the analysis of factors, we must have a list of all actors involved directly or indirectly, analysis of their interests, their relationships, their capacities, their peace agenda, and the incentive for every actor. Analysis of the longer term trends, assessment of the likely shorter term triggers, and assessment, I'm just going over analysis of content of dynamics that refers to what triggers. So if there are elements that will trigger that will diminish the dynamics, that will diminish the conflict, or it will make a larger, a bigger conflict. So we have to analyze all these issues in order to react. So it's basically the causes, the actors, and the dynamics, because this may happen if we don't put a stop or we don't make any correction to this situation. Then it can be a larger damage that we will have to this particular event or community that is usually conflicts come also between institutions. Like, for example, when the Brazil fire happened, there was it was a university museum, but then the people were discussing with the government was discussing with the university was discussing with the Association of Museums. So an event can bring up a conflict. And human beings, by nature, we are like that. We are always, we think differently, and not necessarily will agree with everything. And in times of emergency, we have to mitigate these differences. That's the message of this analysis of conflicts. Next, please. So that is to conclude the situation analysis chapter of the first aid to cultural heritage. And we hope we have covered the basic issues. Of course, you have the manual that you can download on PDF, and then that will give you the examples, templates, and so on with the toolkit. But I leave the floor open for any question, or Abel, if you want to add something, please. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Samuel, for your presentation, and of course for Halcyon coming before for this entire section. Certainly underlining and the importance of making sure we document things, being respectful in our responses. There's so much that came out from this session, but I would really like to encourage persons now, if you have any comments or questions coming out from the sessions that you could share with us. For myself, I just had just like two comments that well stood out for me. That there was a lot of stuff, of course, coming from our last session. I'd like to say that I think we're all in as part of this webinar, working towards becoming first aiders. So we have taken on the title, and we are now all cultural first aiders coming out of this. I like that Samuel said that we're supposed to be fit. I, I don't know how fit I am, but in terms of, but we have to be mindful, of course, what we have to do in terms of moving things and re-evacuating things. We will be called upon in some instances for that to happen. The idea of being respectful, we really of our diversity as a region. I can't underscore that enough. A couple of the examples Hudson gave, we have of groups and persons where if you are not respectful, if you don't understand the things about the culture, it's simple day-to-day things that we may do could cause extreme offense or be destructive for them. And so we have to be mindful, even of course it is an emergency, we do have to remember how we treat with the people in our communities. I'd like to highlight here too that as part of the session, the idea of this webinar is to help build capacity in the region for us to be able to be those first aiders. And the idea of building that network is really very important, which is why the last session is going to be completely focused on strengthening and building our networks. And so we're asking, we haven't got everyone, but some of the people mentioned by Halcyon will be at that session. UNESCO, Chan, Sidema has been asked. I hope they'll be able to make it. And then ICCROM, again, one of our sponsors here, and the Caribbean Heritage Emergency Network, which has come out of a meeting which we had in 2018 following the hurricanes that Kabaka had put on. And coming out of that meeting, there was definitely the commitment on the part of practitioners in the region that we needed to do something to build that integrated network to support each other. So for that session will definitely be very much looking at how we could strengthen those networks, building them, making them in place for when we actually need, or if and when it would seem emergencies arise in our area. One last thing I'm going to say, I'm not seeing anything yet in the comments, is that coming from Puerto Rico, Marla had made a comment to us on the panel. It didn't go out necessarily to the group, but I think I want to highlight one of the things she noted, the idea of issue of looting and identifying our sites. We're really trying to balance the idea of you need the things to be secure. We need the information about where they are, but we also want to secure the sites, and we don't want them to be affected by persons who would be, taking the opportunity when these things happen to loot sites, especially sites like archaeological sites. So it's a good point that that she raised, that we have to be mindful of such issues when we are documenting and putting that information out there. So those are just some of the comments, some of the things I just wanted to raise. Anyone else from the group have any comments, questions? Okay, Samuel or Halcyon, any closing remarks, any other comments you wish to make before we close off? Yeah.
Hey, you hearing me?
Yes, I'm hearing you, Halcyon.
Okay, so yes, we need to be mindful of, places being looted and so on, and how we actually, so mapping out where our cultural sites are and so on. should be done in conjunction with other agencies that can help us. So it's not something to really be put in a public sphere, so to speak, but for first responders to be able to help us in that vein, especially when communications are down, because a number of incidents happen and communication is a big deal. And I just wanted to say as well, even with taking photographs and so on, we just have to be mindful of the technology too, because you may be going into areas that would have no electricity, and sometimes you might have to fall back to basic cameras, like with what do you call it, those disposable cameras and so on, depending on the type of disaster. So, but that will come when we speak about the toolkit and all of that as well.
Yes, I would like to add the importance of when we talk about cultural first aiders. According to our experience at the training center we have here, we have been training in Central America and Latin America and a couple of places in the Caribbean. And I think my conclusion or my view after this experience, which is always good, we're always learning, is that we have to really start creating this cultural first aiders team regionally.
Definitely.
And it is very difficult. That's what my experience, to keep what I think the most, if there's a problem that or a negative thing that I have encountered, is the continuity of people in their institutions, and also the commitment to because this is usually a volunteer activity. So then once you say it's volunteer, a lot of people disappears, and and so you must have a heart, passion for it, and that's difficult to find. I mean, as time goes by, you identify these really hearted people, but another option that we have to find solutions and not just keeping on hopes. It's also to work with this civil protection, because civil protections already have a heart. I mean, for rescue, although they are into the humanitarian field, or somebody from the Red Cross, or I mean, civil protection includes firemen, Red Cross, militaries, and so on. So among this group of this sector, these actors or stakeholders, we will identify along the way some colleagues that would like to be engaged with culture, and they already have a lot of training that they can share for us. Also, it's a two-way way of learning, because we can learn a lot from the civil protection, and vice versa. They can learn a lot from the culture sector. And for me, I think there are more chances, according to my experience, to keep continuity with civil responders, because they already are engaged. They already have like a career for this. And I'm not saying that we should we should give less attention to any sector. We must concentrate on both. But I think we are already on the culture sector, but we have to do a lot of work, because I'm sure that there are many civil protection officers or agents that would be willing to learn about culture, and they will, they can become part of our team. So that takes time to identify. It takes time, because you have to go share workshops with them, and let some time to see if they come back, or if they don't disappear. So, but that's my advice. Since we talk about cultural first aiders, that's something that I can share for you. So, but it's a task that we can start doing in the region.
Most certainly.
Okay, so thank you for those closing remarks. Yes, I'm just browsing through the chat and I don't see any comments or questions there, any raised hands. So I believe we will bring our session to a close. We actually a little earlier today. Just to say thank you to our panelists, of course, for presenting and sharing their expertise with us. We really appreciate that. Thank you all so much for attending and participating as well. We look forward to and encourage you to continue with us into the next two sessions. It will be Tuesday of next week and Tuesday and Thursday of next week. That will be 4 and 5. Those will be the closing off session. Hopefully, the registration link that you click this time would give you the option to choose which days and how many days you would have wanted to attend. But we hope that you will join us for the whole group. And as I've said, as much of the material as we can share will be made available to you in the Google group. We'll upload them as we go along, so you will have the content, the manuals as they have referred. So thank you all so much for joining us. Do have a good afternoon and do keep safe. And see you again next time.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.